Terry Cooper is 25. His wife Maxine is 24. They have a 2-year-old baby named Aaron and a monkey called Walter. If the statistics run true to form, Aaron will be an orphan before his 10th birthday, because both his parents are heroin addicts. In the words of one doctor, they're taking death by installments. Terry and Maxine are 2 of the 899 heroin addicts known to the Home Office. 7 years ago, when Terry first became addicted, the Brain Committee reported that the problem was both small and manageable. But when they reported for the second time in 1966, it was admitted that the number of addicts was rapidly increasing. Since then, many experts believe it has doubled again. But now there are disturbing reports that known cases like Terry and Maxine may only be the tip of a large and unseen iceberg. Crawley in Sussex, a respectable new town of 60,000 people. Until last year, there were only 3 heroin addicts living here known to the Home Office. But then a local doctor became suspicious. In the last year, he has discovered 11 times as many as the official figure.
We thought there was a need to look deeper and closer into the problem. As it were, we had to look under the carpet and try to discover any hidden pool there might be. We made a survey of cases of jaundice amongst young people from January 66 onwards. It is fairly common amongst heroin users because by the nature of things they use unsterile needles and unsterile water to inject themselves, and we found quite a few more cases through this survey. We have made a chart and we can trace about a sort of a family tree which started from 1 person and has spread from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8 and come up to about 33. This is what we have done. So it can be fairly contagious in that sense. It certainly is in Crawley.
Crawley's high percentage of young people makes it an ideal breeding ground for a drugs epidemic. Supplies come from London's West End. Alan is 17 and is receiving treatment for his addiction. Fergie is 18 and still uses drugs.
Most of the drugs, most of the heroin is brought in by people who take it. I wouldn't say there was any pushers of heroin in Crawley. If somebody says, tonight I'm going up to buy drugs, everybody runs around trying to get money, gives it to the person who's going up. The person goes up to London or wherever he goes to get it, normally London. And if he's got a car, he goes by car, which is about the safest means. Otherwise by train and any other way of getting there, hitchhiking. And they bring the heroin back.
There is definitely people going up every day of the week in Crawley. Different people. I mean, just recently I've been going up quite a lot, say 3 times a week. And I find that at least 10 grams being brought back into Crawley, and the stuff that is being used, not being used by the people that go to buy it, is being distributed, a couple of jacks here, a couple of jacks there, to the people that are willing to buy it for 6 or 7 bob a jack.
Well, you go up to Piccadilly, sit in the cafe downstairs, or even stand around Boots, and you see somebody who looks likely. After a time you can sort of tell who is on stuff there, and you just sort of make a pass. They more or less know that what you're wanting, and they give it to you.
How is it distributed when it comes back here?
Well, it's, you know, person says, I'll meet you at such and such a time in a certain area, and people just congregate there, and it's more or less rationed out. As I see it now, it is pretty bad as regards heroin. In younger people, that is. You know, when I say young, I mean 14 years of age. Although I'm only 17, you know, it's not too bad there now, but it's increasing in the younger people. And I would say, like, over the years, at least in the last 4 years, it's sort of gone from practically nothing to very high standard. And it's getting pretty serious.
The drugs which reach Crawley come from London's West End. One chemist shop alone dispenses, on legal prescriptions, 1/10 of all the heroin used in Britain, most of it to addicts. At night, Piccadilly Circus and the streets around it is the traditional marketplace for illicit drug dealing. Overprescribing by some doctors, who care nothing about the harm they do but only about the money they get, has encouraged a thriving drug trade. This consultant psychiatrist is an expert on addiction.
The doctor cannot really have any idea how much an addict really needs, or how much anybody really needs who comes along to see him. If the addict came along, or if the user went along to a doctor and asked him to give him 5 grains of heroin, 5 grains of cocaine, the doctor could not really know and cannot know whether he needs 3 grains of heroin or 10 grains or nothing at all. And therefore there was a large overprescribing. And practically every youngster one saw stated that before he himself went to a doctor in order to get his heroin, he bought it on the illicit market from so-called, wrongly so-called, registered doctors, and registered addicts. And the black market price is interesting that this black market price has apparently stayed constant now for many years, that heroin and cocaine both sold for a pound each. And therefore it's quite a temptation for addicts to get more drugs than they needed and to sell it.
A few hundred yards from Piccadilly Circus, the Blitz Church of St Anne's in Soho is the home of the Association for the Prevention of Addiction. It is also the temporary surgery of Dr. Ian Dunbar. Dr. Dunbar has been treating addicts for more than a year and has gained a reputation for responsible prescribing. He agrees that a great deal of harm has been done through overprescribing by some doctors, but believes that this is the fault of the health service.
You see, there's absolutely no financial provision for heroin addicts to be treated on the health service. I can claim £1, 2 and 6 a quarter as a temporary residence fee for the addicts I treat, but that's the most that I can get. So that I regard the whole business as really rather an eccentric hobby. On the other hand, not all doctors are inclined to do this. They can see that these people need treatment. They're not prepared to do it for nothing. And so, of course, they charge. So the government is, in fact, forcing the private doctors to charge their addicts.
This informal surgery for addicts won't be going much longer. The government has decided that doctors will lose the power to prescribe heroin and cocaine, and treatment centres are being set up where addicts can get their necessary supplies. The new system comes into operation shortly. Some treatment centres are already operational. The Charing Cross unit is the most central of the 15 London outpatient clinics.
How long have you been on drugs altogether?
About 5 years.
How did it start? Tell me about it.
Well, I think it just started because other people started. A few of my mates had a go, so I thought, well, I was going on, just to be one of them.
Mm-hmm. Did you have difficulty in making friends and belonging to a group?
No, not at all.
Did everybody in the group take drugs?
Mostly.
What were they taking?
Just pills at a time.
The Charing Cross unit is staffed by 1 doctor and 2 nurses. Every new patient receives a long and painstaking physical examination. Every detail of his personal case history is checked and rechecked in a thorough but sympathetic interview. We asked the doctor in charge what the treatment centre hoped to do.
Well, let's say what its aims are, because we only very recently started. I think the aim is to prevent the further spread of misuse of drugs, to help the individual to keep him comfortable, and to prevent him having to buy and sell on the black market and hence get into trouble with the police. And thirdly, we hope to be able to get people off drugs and to rehabilitate them.
There are growing fears among some experts and among the addicts themselves that the treatment centres are not going to be able to cope. Professor Francis Camps agrees with the new policy and principle, but he has fears that too few doctors are going to be swamped by too many addicts.
The false idea that one doctor will run a centre, or even two doctors, will have to be done away with, because it would be quite impossible for one or two doctors to give adequate time to the patients. But it's not quite as simple as a lot of people imagine, that you just have a doctor sitting there giving out prescriptions, because if you do that, you're going to be back exactly where you were before. Because I doubt from what people tell me who have been trying this, whether you can handle a case in under about 2 hours each time.
So one doctor would not really be able to deal with more than 3 or 4 patients a day?
That's roughly it, yes.
You know, the sort of relationship they need is one where the doctor does care, because with clinics, you're sort of in and out so quickly, you know, and it's so, well, it's a clinic, it's clinical. Even the sort of staff and the doctors are, you know, you're just another, you're the addict after the one before, you know. That's the way I sort of found it with the clinic. And, you know, you didn't get this feeling that anybody cares.
Hello, Geoffrey Wellington, APA here. The Association for the Prevention of Addiction. We've got one young person waiting in the office at the moment who's in need of a doctor and is very sick. We can't get facilities anywhere for treatment.
Already there is evidence that the existing treatment centres cannot cope with emergencies, never mind the everyday flood of patients they can expect when the new laws are imposed. Officials of the Association for the Prevention of Addiction have frequent difficulties in obtaining treatment for sick addicts.
There's no doctor available. When are they coming back? You must have somebody that can see the person. We can't wait till Wednesday. The man's sick now, not Wednesday. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, bye-bye. The lady, doctor's sick, and she won't be there for a couple of weeks. No more patients there. Oh, well. And this is just a sort of frustrating episode of what goes on the whole time. I've spent up to 3.5 hours ringing around the various centres just hoping to find a doctor that can see the patient and prescribe there and then, not offer me an appointment 5 days hence or 2 weeks hence. If a patient is sick, suffering from drug addiction, they are sick now, not when the doctor is available next Friday fortnight or when the professor comes in on Thursdays and Fridays. The present hours of treatment centres, 9 to 5, for the most part, doesn't permit patients to be sick outside these rather rigid hours.
There is a fear that overworked doctors in the treatment centres will perpetuate the old problem of overprescribing, that addicts will still get more than they need and sell the surplus. Molly Craven is the secretary of the Association for the Prevention of Addiction.
Oh yes, and in the new hospital setup this would be just the same, because junkies are terrific con men. They maneuver and manipulate constantly. And they will somehow or other get more drugs than they need from a large number of doctors, undoubtedly, and especially since the doctors who will be in the treatment centres cannot all be experts on addiction, because we just haven't got that number of people available.
The same doubts were expressed by addicts during a group psychotherapy session in a London hospital.
Yeah, there'll always be dangers of overprescription, because the doctor can never tell how much you're really on, can he? It doesn't matter how much he examines you, he can never tell what's going on inside. You can always say, I'm on 3 and 3 a day, even if you're just using 2 pills every, twice a day.
But the doctor at the Charing Cross Treatment Centre didn't think she would be taken in quite as easily as that.
Well, first of all, you couldn't just walk into the clinic. We would have tried to find out a fair amount about you before we actually saw you. We would try and find out from the Home Office whether you're a known addict, what has been prescribed for you in the past. We look at your arms and see whether those are compatible with the amount of use you state. We take urine samples, we take blood samples. So a man who comes and says he's taking 8 grains of heroin and has hardly marked arms, this just doesn't hold water. And I don't think we'd fall into that trap. We're well aware of the difficulties of either over or under prescribing, and it is indeed difficult to find the correct dosage to keep a patient comfortable without extra supplies on an outpatient basis. And ideally, we should have some assessment beds.
But do you believe that your personal experience in running a treatment centre for addicts is sufficient to stop you from falling into the dangers, for the time being at least, in the short term, of overprescription?
I'm sure I shall fall into it at times, but being aware of it is already the first step towards not doing it.
The treatment centres are more likely to give addicts less drugs than they need, which is equally dangerous.
There's as much a danger of underprescribing as overprescribing. As confirmed addicts like myself, incurables if you like, well, take a fixed amount, and anything below that amount is just impossible. I go to the treatment centre for as long as I get heroin from the centre, and whatever they give me, I shall supplement the amount I need by going onto the black market, which is a pretty black future for me and my family.
The new regulations will only stop family doctors prescribing heroin and cocaine, but nearly all addicts are now using more than just those two drugs. Bob is 25. He gave us a list of all the drugs he had used.
There's Viceptone and that's methadone. All these sort of stimulant pills. There's Benzedrine and Dexedrine, Preludin, Purple Hearts, Librium and Nardil, Tryptophan, Stelazine, Dapsazole, Ritalin, Viceptone pills, Viceptone in syrup, Viceptone injections, morphine, apomorphine, Nostraline, which was an inhaler that was taken off the market, that used to be broken open, you know, sort of swallowed. Pethidine is another one. LSD, ephedrine. Oh yeah, I smoked. Taken quite a few LSD trips. I think they're quite good.
A junkie like Bob has as much knowledge of drugs and their effects as most doctors. But the doctors do tend to agree with him that one effect of the new law could be a switch from heroin and cocaine to other equally dangerous drugs. Professor Camps has found evidence of multiple drug use in dead addicts.
I think this is a definite risk which will have to be considered very seriously now. You see, it's only heroin and cocaine at the moment which is illegal to prescribe to addicts. There is really, may well be, a situation in which the addict could switch over to something else which can be prescribed.
The consultant psychiatrist has also observed that many of his patients use several drugs.
Clearly there is a danger that addicts will go from one drug to another. That's always been in the past the case, that if one addictive drug was restricted, other substitutes were then abused. And methadone is an obvious example. Well, methadone is an amphetamine, so it shares all the dangers which amphetamines, the PEP pills, have. That means they can be leading to a psychosis which is clinically quite indistinguishable from schizophrenia.
When the new law comes into force, these other drugs will still be available. We asked the patients receiving treatment in a London hospital addiction unit what effects the amphetamine drugs, and in particular methadone, had on them. They described what are aptly known as the horrors.
And I can always remember one night I had this suede coat and there was this big fox thing and it had a head like a fox on it, you know, and they was all sitting in the room and they were all looking at me and I had the real horrors, you know, and I was sure that this fox was alive, you know, and I kept shaking it and sewing it on the coat and I could see its mouth open and its eyes looking at me, and my mother was looking at me and my father, and they were all laughing at me, you know, and in the end I just got it and I ripped it up, you know. It was so terrible, you know, and I said, why are you all doing this to me, you know, and I just ran into the bedroom and cried and started smashing up again.
Molly Craven, like nearly all the critics of the new policy, agrees with the measures in principle. But she believes that the facts of the situation don't match up to the optimistic ministerial statements.
One, I suppose, must direct anger at the Ministry of Health and to some degree the Ministry of Education, because these facts have been clear enough for a very long time and nothing whatever has been done about it. We've received an awful lot of cotton wool and there's been a lot of blinkering of the public with lots of statistical stuff about the amount of beds available, amount of facilities available, and when you actually need them, they don't exist.
Kenneth Robinson, as Minister of Health, you seem to be the target of many doubts and criticisms about the new policy.
Well, I'd like to answer one or two of the criticisms that have been made before describing what the policy is. First of all, you can't criticize a policy which is not yet in operation. And the new arrangements for treating addicts in a hospital setting will come into operation on the day that the general practitioners are banned from prescribing heroin to addicts. Now, we have been criticized, particularly by some of the voluntary bodies who are working in this field. And I recognize that they're trying to help in this very difficult and intractable problem. I only wish that they found it possible to call attention to their own efforts without constantly denigrating the efforts of others, particularly the efforts of the government. And I would have thought that at least the reverend gentlemen that are associated with these bodies would have heard of the injunction, do good by stealth. Now, we are, of course, embarking on a wholly new policy. No one can say whether it's going to be successful. All I can say is that I am acting on the best professional expert advice that we have been able to get. And we will have to see whether this is a satisfactory way of containing heroin addiction. Now, one of your contributors, Mrs. Craven, has suggested that the treatment facilities, which I announced in the House of Commons a week ago, don't exist. Now, this is quite untrue. They do exist. They're not fully developed yet, and that is one of the reasons why the policy has not yet come into operation. But we are satisfied that these facilities will, when they're fully developed very shortly, be able to cope with what we now understand is the best estimate of the number of addicts in the London area likely to come forward for treatment. We're working on around 1,000, but if it's rather more than that, I do not expect the system to break down, as has been confidently forecast by some of the critics.
Well, many people working in the field seem to think that that figure of 1,000 is a gross underestimation. But in fact, the figure would possibly be 2,000 to 3,000.
Well, maybe they do, but they cannot know, and all I can assure you is that I have the access to the best information that's available. It may not be right, only time will tell.
Can we turn to the dangers of the treatment centres? Some critics say that a treatment centre is likely to fall into the same pit as the well-meaning GPs have fallen into. That is, that they will either overprescribe or underprescribe.
Well, I don't think anybody suggests that the well-meaning GPs have been underprescribing. Of course, there is a risk that they will overprescribe initially and possibly underprescribe. But certainly there will be no incentive to them to overprescribe in the same way that there's been an incentive for doctors in private general practice.
Only cocaine and heroin have been taken out of the hands of GPs, that these are the only two classed as hard, dangerous drugs, and that frequently addicts are now turning to other drugs which are psychologically possibly even more damaging. Drugs like the amphetamines, especially methadone.
Yes, well, of course, these are problems too, but we set out to try and contain the growth of heroin addiction, because that is what the Brain Committee told us was the immediately urgent and important problem. Now, I have asked the Advisory Committee on Drug Dependence to examine urgently the problems thrown up by the question of addiction to amphetamines and the other drugs that you mentioned. But our first task, I'm sure, must be to deal with heroin addiction, and these other drugs, dangerous as they are not, I think, quite as lethal as heroin.
Finally, we asked one of the doctors involved in the new system for her assessment of its chances of success.
I think it's too early it's much easier to criticize in retrospect. And I think if you come back in a year's time and ask the same question, I'll be able to give you a more sensible answer.
Do you have any doubts?
Come back in a year's time.